What is going on, guys? Welcome to another JavaScript for Beginners lesson. In today's lesson, we are going to learn about one of the most important things in programming, and that is functions. We are going to see how to write functions in JavaScript, and along the way, we see why functions are so important. Without taking so much of our time, let's get started. So, what is a function? A function is basically a reusable chunk of code that does a specific thing. Let me clear this. We are going to understand this better as we begin to write some codes. Let's take for example, we have day number. That is, a week has 7 days. Let's assume that the first day, day number 1 is Sunday, 2 is Monday, 3 is Wednesday, in that order. So let's make a constant. Let's call it some day number to be equal to 1. What we want to do is, depending on the day number, we are going to have the name of that day. For example, 1 is Sunday. So we say let the day be start off as null, and we switch day number. By the way, we have covered switch statements in one of our previous lessons. So if you don't know how switch statement works, please make sure to watch that. And we say case 1 if the day number is 1. So we say that day is equal to Sunday, and break if the day number is 2. We say that day is equal to Monday, and of course break. To save us some time, I will pause this video and complete the other cases, that is for Tuesday to Saturday. So here is the completed checks for the 7 days of the week, from Sunday to Saturday, and the default case in case none of these cases are matched. Down here, basically I want to do a console.log the day. What we have as some day number is 1, so we expect the console.log to display Sunday. I will go ahead to run this. We have Sunday, of course. What if we have another number? For example, let's say const another day number to be equal to 4, doesn't matter the number. How do we check and return or assign the day? That is the name of the day. Well, one thing that might come to mind is, why not copy this entire thing for day? Let's come down here and have day 2 to start off as null, and then we paste the entire switch statement. Let me give some space so this is not confusing. And here we say another day number, and of course we replace all these with day 2, like so. Replace everything with day 2 and come down here and say console.log day 2. I will save this and let's run the code. We get the 2 answers. The first one is for the very first case here, where the day number is 1. Of course, it is Sunday. And the second is for another day number, that is 4, which corresponds to Wednesday. So we begin to see a pattern here that if we have multiple of these constants here, like we have here, let's say we have let's call it const yet another day number, can be anything. We are going to basically repeat the same thing over and over and over again. This is unnecessary code duplication, and one of the problems that functions help us to solve is to avoid code duplications. Remember from our definition that we say a function is a reusable chunk of code that does a specific thing, right? It means that we can actually use functions to simplify this. If you look at the switch statements, they are basically doing the same thing. This switch statement checks the day number, whatever that is switched to, and returns the name of that day, depending on the number. The switch statement above does exactly the same thing. So how do we achieve this with function? How do we eliminate all these duplications, all these copy and paste, Let's see how function works. I will clear everything we have here, and how do we write functions in JavaScript? In JavaScript, we have what we call function definition. It's basically saying this is how we write functions in JavaScript. To write a function, we use the function keyword. You type function, the next thing that comes is name of my function. This is just an example. I mean, you can name your function whatever you like, right? Then we have this parenthesis and the curly braces. Inside the curly braces is where we write the statements, the logic, whatever our function does. Let's take, for example, a function that multiplies a value by 2. Let's call this multiply by 2. Basically, what it does is something like this. Let me give you an example. Let a to be equal to 3. Let answer be equal to a times 2. Of course, we all know what the answer is. Console.log answer. Save that, run the code. The answer is 6 because a is 3 and 3 times 2 is 6. We want a function that does similar thing, so that assuming we have another number b, let's call this b. B can be anything. It can be 3, it can be 4. We don't have to repeat ourselves and say answer 2. Let answer 2 be equal to b times 2. That is the same code duplication we have with switch statement. What we are going to do is to have a function that takes any number at all, any number, whether it is the number we assign to a, to b, whatever number. Let's call that a value. Let's call that value. By the way, this is parameter, right? We have function keyword here. We have the name we have chosen for the function. You choose a name that makes sense, a name that is descriptive of what the function does. Here we have parameters, and inside the curly braces we have the logic. The parameter can be more than one, it can be anything. Let's call this a number so it is clear. A number, you can call it anything you want, right? Basically what we are going to do is we say const answer to be equal to a number, a number times 2. That's what we agreed. We said that this multiplies number by 2. We are done with our function. The last thing is to return the answer. Oftentimes you are going to see return statement, this return, inside a function. It makes it possible for us to use whatever value that is returned. So for example, I'm just going to say multiply by 2. What are we multiplying? 3. This 3 here is what we have here as a number. So this is called parameter. Over here we call it argument, right? But the most important thing to understand at this point is that a number we have here is we are passing the actual value, the number we are working with here, in this case 3. And of course, because this will return the answer, we can go ahead and display that answer with console.log, paste the entire thing inside there so that we can see it in the console. You don't need console.log to make use of that function. If we come down here, we see 6. That is because we passed 3 here, and 3 times 2, that gives us 6, and we return that 6, that answer. Okay, let's change the value to 4. Clear the console, save, and run. 4 times 2 is 8. So you can see that our function is working as expected. You give it any number, it doesn't matter the number, it will multiply the number by 2 and give us the result. And of course, we can reuse this function. Remember that one of the benefits, or one of the things that is about functions, is that we can reuse it. Reusable chunk of code that does something. In this case, it basically does multiplication by 2. So let me go ahead and put all those values there. I will of course run the code again. We can see all the answers. 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6, 5 times 2, 10, 1 times 2 is 2. So this is a basic example of functions. We don't need console.log. The console.log is so that we can print the answer on the console. Of course, we can actually assign whatever value this results to a variable or constant, whatever you can call it. Let's say const my answer to be equal to that. We can come down here and do console.log my answer. That also works, right? If I save and run this, of course, we get the result here to be 4. What happens when we don't make use of return statement? Let me remove this. Of course, we are not going to get anything here. The function will work as expected, but we did not return the answer so that we can make use of it outside that function. If I go ahead now and run the code again, let me clear the console so it is not confusing. Our function runs fine, but it says undefined. That's because we did not return any value, right? I will do this. I will undo this. A function is not limited to only one parameter. For example, let's modify what we have a little bit. Let's call this add two numbers. Let's call this A and B. We have two numbers. We basically want to add the two numbers. So we can say answer to be A plus B, and you return the answer. So the function can take variable or varied number of parameters. We can do what we did before. We can actually work with variables. Let's say x to be equal to 1. Let y equal to, I'm using x and y, so you understand that the name you use here does not really affect whatever you are using outside here, right? So it's not a must to say A to be that and B to be 2. No, that's not how it works. You can use it if you want to. And what we can say is let answer be equal to add two numbers x, y. And of course, this answer has nothing to do with what we have inside here. We can call this, my answer. I don't know. Whatever I call it does not matter. Here we can do console console.log my answer. Save that, we run the code, we get just a moment, that should give us 3. Oh, that was a mistake there. This should be addition. That's what we agreed. Say we are going to have addition. So 1 plus 2, that gives us 3. And of course, we have 2 parameters here. That is why we are passing 2 values here. You can hard code them. You can have 3 and 6. I mean, you can use the function as long as the condition is satisfied. The condition is that when we call the function, it is expecting 2 values, the first value and the second value, right? If I do console.log, that also works. So far, we have learned a few things about functions. This is function keyword, the name we want to give our function. Here we have parameters, which can be 0 or more. And here we are calling the function. Making use of the function is known as calling the function. When we call the function, we pass the expected arguments, the values the function is expecting. There are various things we can do with functions. There are different ways we can use them. We are not going to cover all those things at this level and in this single video, but at least let's learn a few more things. For example, you can have function that doesn't have a variable. It is not compulsory. It's not a must. Let's say greet. This function is for greeting someone. We can do something like console.log hello. That is basically it. Over here we can say greet by calling the function greet. And we run the code, we see hello down here. Why do we have hello? Because we are doing console.log inside here, right? We can return that hello if you want to. And of course, if we run the code, we are not going to see that hello because we are not displaying anything inside the function. Basically, the greet, we have the string returned from that function, hello. To see it, we can do console.log greet. Now we are going to see hello because we are displaying whatever the function greet returns. As another example, let's undo a little. Let's undo to the add 2 numbers. A function can have a default parameter. For example, I'll put 2 here. I will show you how that works in a moment. So I call the same function again. This time I am passing only one value. The reason I am passing a value is that the second parameter here, has a default value that should be used if nothing is passed for B. So it means that if I call this function add 2 numbers and pass only one value, of course that is for A because it goes in order. The first value is for the first parameter here, the next value is for the next parameter. If I call the function passing only one value, the B, we make use of the default value. So here we are going to have A plus the value of B, that is 2 in this case. I'll go ahead and run this. We get 5 because 3 plus 2 is 5. But if I pass a value, it will override whatever the default value is here. In this case, the 2 will be ignored and 5 will be used. I will save this and run the code. You can see that we have 8 down here. So a parameter can have a default value. The next thing we want to talk about functions is hoisting. This is a jargon to say that you can actually declare function down there as we have it and call it before that declaration. So basically speaking, we can move everything we have up and our function still works. Although this does not work with arrow function, which we are going to learn a little bit in a moment. For the function, as we have it here, we can actually make use of it even before it is declared. The function is kind of behind the scene. JavaScript moves this declaration up, and then the function calls kind of down. But that is not really our concern, how it works behind the scene. But you can use function even before where it is declared. To understand this better, let me run this first before I explain something else. I'll save the code, run this. Our function works fine, no issues. To understand what I mean better, let's say for example you have x to be equal to 3, say const x to be equal to 3. You know we can come down here and say console.log x, no issues. We have declared the constant x before doing the console.log. But if we try to do console.log x before declaring that, let's run the code again. You can see we have an error because x has not been initialized, whatever. But in the case of function, we can see that it is hoisted. We can use it before where it is declared, right? Let's revisit what we started off with. At the beginning, we had something like this, where for each constant, we are copying and pasting the same kind of code. The functions we've seen so far, they basically have like 2 lines of code inside. A function can have multiple lines of code, although it is oftentimes better to have fewer lines of code in your function so that someone can easily look at it, understand what is going on here. A function should not be doing so many things at the same time, basically. We can change this to be a function. I will just cut the entire thing. Let's call that function day name. We can call the function whatever we like. We paste the entire switch statement inside there. Here, let's declare a variable. Let day start off as null. That should be let. And this function, you guessed, we take parameter some day number. Finally, we are going to return what? We're going to return the day. So this is our function with the switch statement and returning the day. We can call this function, we can say let some day number. Let me use something else. Number to be equal to 3. So we can say let, you can just do console.log, no need typing all those things. We already know how this works. Day name to be, we call that, we pass num there. Go ahead and run the code. I have an error somewhere. Oh, this is console.log day number, day name actually. Clear the console, run one more time. We have Tuesday. We don't actually need that guy there. We can pass it directly in the console.log. Now, of course, we can reuse this over and over again. Let's pass something that doesn't exist. Put a number here, another number here. Clear the console, save and run the code. We get all the answers. The first is unknown because we passed 3000, and Wednesday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So you can see how using a function has simplified the code for us. With one function, we have the switch statement inside it. We can, call it multiple times as much as we like. and we don't have to repeat the logic, the code, like we did earlier. Let's look at what is called arrow function. It goes by other names in JavaScript, but that doesn't really matter. An arrow function is similar to the function we have seen so far. It has different syntax, and there are technical differences between it and the function, should I call that normal function that we have seen so far. We're not going to go into the technical details because at least I think those are above the level we are at in this lesson. But let's just see how to write arrow function and a few things to note, because you are going to encounter arrow function a lot in modern JavaScript. Let's have the add two numbers. This is the function name. I think we have used this before, where we have something like A and B, right? We can make use of arrow function like this. We're going to change this up a little bit. Const add two numbers to be equal to that. We put kind of arrow and we put the curly braces. This is how we can write arrow function. There are other variants of this. We have the function name. We have this equality sign. Here we have those parameters like we had before. Then we have this arrow, kind of the curly braces. Inside here, of course, is where our logic goes. Inside here, this is kind of expression in JavaScript, right? We are assigning all these to the constant add two numbers. If I cut, you can see that we're basically doing kind of assignment here. Inside here, we can go ahead and let's say const answer to be equal to A plus B, as we did before. We then go ahead and return the answer. We come down here and do console.log, add two numbers. Let's take 2 and 3. Save that, run the code. Let me clear the console, run the code again. We get the answer 5. Let's try to move this up like we did for normal function. Save this, run the code again. This time we get an error. One of the basic differences to note about arrow function and the other function, it's called that normal function, is that arrow functions are not hoisted. We talked about hoisting, whereby you can actually call function before where it is declared, right? We cannot do that with arrow function because this is basically like an expression in JavaScript. Like we have const, let me change this to add two numbers to be anything. Here we can do console.log add two numbers. I mean, something similar to that. We cannot move add two numbers up. I know the name is confusing now, but at least you get the gist. We cannot do something like that. That's similar way hoisting and arrow function, they don't work. Another thing about arrow function is, assuming this has only one parameter, let's take A to be there, and our answer, let's just say A times 2, doesn't matter. When we have only one parameter, we don't really require the parentheses. The parentheses keeps coming when I save because by default I've configured my code editor to put those parentheses, but this should work exactly fine as it is. Of course, here we don't need to pass two values, just pass only one. If I save, my code editor will add those parentheses again, but as it is, that works fine. If you don't have any parameter at all, then the parenthesis is required. Assuming we don't have any parameter at all, for example, greet, like we had it before, return, we can actually return straight without any extra line there. We can return hello. This is the case where we don't have any parameter. In that case, you cannot have something like this. The parenthesis must be there. We come down here and say greet. Of course, we remove that for there. Save and run. We have hello. Another thing about functions is that we can call a function inside another function. Let's take, for example, we have this function get full name. Let's make use of arrow function to be first name, last name as parameters. We can return these are backticks, not single quotes. Backticks, $, curly braces, first name, space, the same thing, curly braces, last name. This will give us full name. Of course, console.log get full name. We say John as the first name and Doe as the last name, John Doe. Save that and run. Run the code. Oh, come on, not like that. So we have John Doe, obviously. Let's make another function. Let's call that. By the way, you can call arrow function inside DOMA function. That works as well. Let's call this about a person. Let's take first name, last name, age, I don't know, whatever. What we want to do is return an about. This is just an example, just so we can see how we can use a function inside another function. So here we can say return, actually let me get the full name first, const full name to be equal to get full name, first name, last name. That should be const. We return something like this is we have backticks here. Backticks, we say dollar curly braces, full name is age old. So this is really something like John Doe is 20 years old, whatever. Down here we can then say console.log about first name John, last name Doe, and the age 23, for example. We save that and run the code. It says John Doe is 23 old. We know we mean 23 years old, of course. Basically, the key thing here is that we are able to call this function, that is get full name, inside another function, about. Alright guys, so far so good. Like I said, we are not going to cover every single thing there is to learn about functions in this video. We don't want that information overload, at least at this level where we are, so that no one gets confused. There are many things you will learn along the line as you progress. You're going to learn about things like closure, this keyword, this like this, the differences between arrow function and normal function, and other things about function. There is rest parameters, there are a couple of things left, right? But we are not going to go into that in this video. I believe we have made some really good progress so far into learning functions in JavaScript. To wrap things up, let me quickly recap on the syntaxes. We said that to define a function, you have the function keyword. then name of your function, name of fn, then the parentheses and the curly braces. Inside here is where you put your logic, whatever the function does. Oftentimes, a function will return something unless it doesn't need to return anything. Then we have arrow function that we say it is basically like an expression. We can say something like greet. That is the name of the function. Here we have the parentheses. We have this arrow like thing. Inside here we have our logic. An arrow function can of course have parameters as well, a, b, c, whatever. These are the two syntaxes. Okay guys, this brings us to the end of this lesson. Please try to create some functions yourself, try to play with it, try different things, call a function inside another function, reuse the functions, so that this will stick. That is the best way to learn, by trying out something. Until next time, happy coding.